Well, good morning everyone and welcome on behalf of the Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce to this morning's event focusing on active travel. For those who don't know me, my name is Jo Davidson. I'm Head of Policy at the Chamber and I'm here today in place of our Chief Executive Liz McAreevy, who is on annual leave and sends her apologies. But it's my great pleasure to introduce the session this morning and to introduce just our panel. Before I do that, just to sort of do some very brief scene setting, because obviously we want to make sure we give the panel as much opportunity this morning and you as much opportunity to ask questions as possible. But obviously, given the current situation, attention is turning now to the easing of lockdown measures and the economic restart. Many of us are either making plans to get back into the work environment or office if we haven't been doing so already throughout what's been happening. And we're having to arrange to do so in what will be, and I hate to use this term because it's so overused already, the new normal. One of the things we're hearing a lot about in the Chamber is the desire for businesses and people not to just go back to doing things the way that we did them, but to take this opportunity to now look at doing things very differently. And not just because the situation necessitates it, though obviously there is a driver for that. But sustainability and well-being we see are being prioritised now far more than they were before. And active travel, both for employees and for citizens in general, will play a key role in this approach. So this morning we're going to discuss the important role that active travel will play in Edinburgh moving forward. As some of you will know, active travel was a very significant part of the city mobility plan, which has recently been under consultation. And not just because it has a role to play in realising the vision to make the city healthier and to provide a higher quality of life for all residents, but also to help meet the very ambitious carbon neutral and emissions targets that the city has to achieve by 2030. So that's why we're really delighted this morning to be joined by our expert panel. So we have Karen McGregor, who's the Director of Sustrans Scotland. We have Lee Craigie, who's the Active Nation Commissioner for Scotland, and the panel will be chaired by Councillor Leslie McInnes of the City of Edinburgh Council, who's already very briefly introduced herself. Councillor McInnes is the SNP Councillor for Liberton Gilmerton, and she's the Transport and Environment Convener for the City of Edinburgh Council, as well as the Deputy Leader of the SNP group on the Council, and she lives in the ward that she represents. Originally from Skye, she grew up in several places in Scotland and as an adult has lived both rurally and in Glasgow and Edinburgh, so no partisan stuff there. For almost 15 years she lived and worked around Geneva in Switzerland as part of the senior management team for an international NGO dealing with landmines and cluster munitions. But most of her working life has been in the public sector in communications, inward investment and NGO management. She's particularly interested in both shaping a sustainable, inclusive and healthy transport environment in Edinburgh, which equips the city for the future to help deliver an attractive environment for all of those who live, work and visit Scotland's beautiful capital city. So I think we can agree that that makes her ideally placed to chair this morning's session. So Councillor McInnes, I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much indeed, Jo. That's been very helpful, and it's quite strange sometimes when you hear a biography of yourself to see your life laid out like that. But it does touch on a lot of the key things that we're going to be talking about this morning in terms of active travel. I'm really glad to have this opportunity to discuss it in the context of an economic recovery discussion. So can I just jump now to the other two members of the panel and ask them to give a little bit of lowdown on who they are, what they're attempting to achieve, particularly within the realms of active travel, and what their organisation represents. So could we go first, please, to Karen?
Hi, everybody. So I'm Karen McGregor, and I'm the Scotland Director with Sustrans in Scotland. And I joined 3 weeks before we went into lockdown because I'm covering Grace Martin's maternity leave. So it's been an interesting journey, albeit one where I haven't really moved out, my study in my own house since March. But prior to joining Sustrans, I was 2 years in the West Coast ferry operator, Calmac Ferries, which I'm sure Leslie knows well, having been living in Skye. And prior to that, I led a charity in Scotland called First Port that supports start-up businesses, but primarily are focused on, social enterprises. So no stranger to Lee Craigie, because Lee was one of the first social entrepreneurs that I came across when I joined First Port way back in 2009. And prior to that, I'd spent about 7 years in the Big Lottery Fund. So in a strange way, all of that experience actually gave me quite a good grounding for what quickly became a baptism of fire, joining, you know, an organisation that's operating within the transport sphere that basically was asked, could you give out, or could you design and give out £30 million of public money at a week's notice? Excuse me. And obviously, you know, working in funding, and it's, you know, it's been a very strange last few months, but actually a very rewarding last few months. And I will say, Leslie, I said to Lee, I says, you get a harder time. I says, trying to get £5,000. I says, out of First Port, than what some of the local authorities have done, getting 5 million out of Sustrans, the speed at which we moved. It's I'm not joking. So that's basically me. But I'll go into obviously you know, the discussion on active travel when she comes back round. Leslie, thanks.
Thank you. Lee, you've already been name checked. So do you want to give a little bit of background about what you're trying to do?
Yeah, I'd be delighted. Thanks very much for having me along this morning. It's a really exciting conversation to be having with business at the moment, so I'm delighted to be part of it. I am the Active Nation Commissioner for the Scottish Government. That is a role that is joint funded between transport and health, so I'm sure we'll go into how those two things meet in the middle as we go through this morning's discussion. But I guess the most important part in terms of introductions is how I got to this role. Karen's already alluded to my past as a social entrepreneur. I trained as an outdoor instructor and a child and adolescent psychotherapist. And then I brought those two things together and applied for First Port funding to run a project called Psychotherapy, which worked one-to-one with some of our most excluded young people, because I absolutely passionately believe in the social, emotional and physical health benefits to being everyday active. And that underpins why I took on this role as Active Nation Commissioner. So that's my background. I lived in the Highlands because I personally love being outdoors and active every day. But in taking this role as Active Nation Commissioner, I realised that if I was going to affect change on a grander level, I needed to be based within a population density, because that is how actually it was much to my disdain, because I used to ride bikes professionally. I love riding bikes. It was my career for 10 years. And I thought, great, this is the silver bullet. We'll just get everybody on a bike, taking their kids to school and doing their shopping. And it breaks my heart to say that that's probably not the solution here. My love bike riding is probably not the solution. The solution is going to be getting everybody just walking. And so focusing on Edinburgh, which is such a walkable place, and the lens that has with the economy and how that can boost the economy are just, they're blowing my mind at the moment, especially in the current climate. So that's the background.
Thank you very much. I think perhaps before we get tucked into sort of discussing things in more detail, it might be quite helpful to frame what we're talking about in terms of active travel, because I'm conscious that some of our audience, I mean, we're so used to having this phrase trip off our tongues, but for some parts of our audience, it may not be quite so familiar. So certainly from the point of view of the council, how we define it, and I think it's reflected across everybody else who talks about this, is active travel is essentially pedestrians. It's people who use wheelchairs or motorised scooters to get around as a mobility aid. So it's wheeling. That's the phrase we tend to use. And then, of course, it's also cycling, as Lee was picking up on there at the end of her contribution there. Now, within that, of course, there's all sorts of aspects that might have a direct impact on business. So whether you're talking about, for example, a retail area, a shopping street, and the impact that infrastructure to help more people walk or cycle would have on those businesses. And then, of course, there's the other issue about work as an employer. and how you manage the commute and help your employees to try and take advantage of active travel options. Of course, active travel also sits very closely beside public transport, because if you talk about journeys end to end, then more often than not, people will be having a combination of those methods. Somebody might walk to a bus stop, or they might cycle to a tram stop, and then hop on an alternative method. Some take their bikes with them and get off at the other end. Others will have another walk at the other end. So there's always usually quite a lot of combination between active travel and public transport use as well. And of course, it stands in marked contrast to car use. And in terms of us emerging from this period in all our lives, there is quite a strong fear, certainly in the big urban centres, that what we will see is an increased use of cars versus active travel and public transport use. And of course, part of that is about the reduced capacity on public transport at the moment, courtesy of the space distancing requirements, and also a perceived potential lack of confidence in public transport as we continue to try to suppress this infection and to try to remove its immediate threat. So there are a number of aspects there in active travel that I think we need to look at, and so on. And so as we go into it, I suppose this is quite a broad question, but for the panel, what I'm interested in is how you think active travel can be applied in a business context. Now, I've already defined between perhaps delivery of customer into a retail setting, but we obviously also have to look at delivery, we have to look at employment, how people get to and from their place of work, and so on. So how do we look at active travel as being a key component in our economic recovery? Karen, can I come to you first?
Yes, so I think, before today, I suppose active travel is quite new to me in the sense of actually working in the sector, but I'm no stranger to it because, I tend to walk most places or, get public transport. And I could see before I joined Sustrans, it was obvious that it's an area that's grown in visibility, scale and impact over the last few years. But I think, and prior to going into lockdown, there was definitely a clear direction of travel from Scottish Government and also, at a local level as well, especially in Edinburgh. The role that active travel plays in promoting inclusive economic growth and also the wider wellbeing economy. But I think basically as we respond to the impacts of COVID, and as we are carefully considering how we're emerging from lockdown safely, active travel, I think, is now widely recognised across just about every policy area as being one of the enablers for allowing our towns and cities to get back on our feet again. I think it became very, very quickly, and especially as Sustrans was developing what's become known as the Spaces for People programme, suddenly, everyone was turning around and realising actually this is needed because in terms of how we get people moving, around their town centres again or their local high streets, we've got to create the space for them. So one of the things I did in terms of looking at the, sort of pre-lockdown, like I did ask myself, I thought, right, what are the actual economic, benefits of active travel? And I came across, lots of studies, but the one I kind of honed in on was one that the Transport for London had produced, which it's got some real, I think, some real startling facts in it that actually sort of bust some of them. I thought that, some of the misperceptions that people carry around about, walking and cycling and the impact that it might have, if you've got to take away parking or take cars out of the town centre, when in actual fact, it has the opposite effect. So I'll maybe just give you some of the kind of highlights that I pulled out of that report, but I would encourage you to even go and have a look at it yourself. So, first takeaway for me was that active travel can improve, basically, if you invest in active travel infrastructure, you can boost your local high street and town centre. And this study found that in some areas, retail went up by 30% because of the investment in active travel infrastructure. People who are walking and cycling tend to visit their town centres like 16 times a month, as opposed to people in a car who maybe do it, half that, number of times. The second takeaway for me was that keeping physically fit and active can reduce absence and increase your productivity levels. Now, that is good news for business, because basically it means that if your employees are active, then they're going to be taking fewer sick days than people who are not. And I think when the study added that up, it was worth about 128 million to the UK economy. So that's not an insignificant figure. The third thing is that businesses, and this was businesses themselves, which I thought was really important, don't just ask cyclists and people and pedestrians. Actually, what do businesses think? Embeds that were interviewed said that 85% thought that cycling was important and 95% said that walking was important. And that's because they can see that it was important for them also to be that kind of business that valued that, because by the time we get to 2025, 3 in 4 workers will be millennials, and this is the generation who use cars less and are much more focused on the environment. So those were like 3 big takeaways for me when I started, sort of drilling down into actual, some of the studies that have been carried out around the economic benefits.
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because all of what you've said there can be picked up and put into almost any city and see it reflected back at you. And we know that beyond TfL, Run Transport for London, there are studies internationally that show this up time and time again. There's one that I was dipping into recently that looked at Manhattan, and they were saying that when they had put in a big placemaking effort, which included cycling facilities and pedestrianisation and various other aspects of active travel related placemaking, what they saw was the retail businesses going up by 49%. Now, those are the kinds of arguments that are very difficult to ignore, but they're often ones that don't come until much later in the conversation. We see time and time again in cities where, when you're looking at a retail centre, a shopping area, the first reaction of businesses is to say, no, you can't take away car parking spaces to give over to active travel or placemaking efforts to make the place more pleasant to be in. Because you're going to take away my customers. My customers come by car. And we actually know time and time and time again, it's proved that perception proves to be wrong. And I know that Sustrans done some work around sort of the demolishing of those myths, because in actual fact, the delivery of customers into a retail store or a hospitality setup, whatever it is in that area, for example, if you look at cycle parking per square metre, it delivers 5 times the retail spend than the same area of car parking. Even if you've got car parking that turns over regularly, that's still the case. So there are all sorts of aspects here which I think business in the form of retail and hospitality will actually have to try and grapple with just now, because it's about we've had such a shock to the system that this is a time now to stop and actually start to look at what's out there in terms of evidence and say, well, how does that apply to our particular area? And that's certainly what we're trying to do as part of the Spaces for People initiative, which Scottish Government funding, there was reference earlier on from Karen there about the £5 million that Edinburgh won out of that fund. We took half of that initial national fund. And the reason for that is that we'd already moved ourselves quite far forward in terms of understanding and thinking about the benefits that active travel could bring to the city in an overall sense, but also specifically in terms of customer delivery into retail and hospitality outlets. So there's a lot of space in there, I think, for adoption of new approaches, and the information's out there. The evidence that supports a shift away from car travel to shopping areas or hospitality outlets and so on towards active travel is supported again and again and again. Now, as always, because I'm a politician, I can always talk about myself very well. And you mentioned the health benefits there. what I found most interesting when I started cycling, I'm now an e-bike convert, have been for the last couple of years. I cycle about 10 miles a day under normal commuting conditions, is the reliability of time and the health benefits of it. So I now know that I can leave 25 minutes to go from my back door into the city chambers every day, and I will make it in under 25 minutes. It's incredibly reliable. That's a message that transfers over into deliveries. It transfers over into customers stuck in congestion. That's the kind of messaging which I think is very important for businesses to pick up and run with. The health benefits also, I think, in terms of what it does for employees. For example, fewer sick days, greater motivation. There's all sorts of studies that show that that's the case. That people enjoy the benefits of cycling, they arrive more prepared to work. There are all sorts of potential benefits for businesses as employers in that sense, as well as for the individual employees. Lee, can I come to you to look at the same sort of area about really how you think active travel is best applied in a business context?
Yeah, so I guess lately it's been, there's a little bit of feedback on my computer here. Is everyone hearing me okay?
I can certainly hear you.
I'll just keep talking. It was probably just on my computer. So I've been really excited lately, moving around my local area. We've all been being asked to stay more local, and the conversations that I've been having with business owners and also the customers of those businesses have been really, really interesting. Suddenly, I've realised that my agenda as Active Nation Commissioner, who's trying to get everyone to benefit personally from being everyday active, is suddenly the high street traders' agenda. It's the economy's agenda. If we can create spaces in our public realm for people to want to be active, then everybody benefits. And I think what's been so interesting to the traders that I've been working with more closely lately is that they've realised that there's been a bit of a mismatch between what they thought their customers wanted and what they've been delivering up until now. So just to be specific about this, I ride bikes a lot, as I might have already mentioned. I have a cargo bike in my life, and I know a few people also in Edinburgh with cargo bikes. And so when lockdown happened, people weren't getting food. The people that needed it most weren't getting food. And so me and a few volunteers were going around supermarkets and picking up waste produce on our cargo bikes, which are these, just a normal bike, but with a huge bed on the front that can carry enormous amounts of groceries, and we were distributing this around the city to the people that needed it most. And businesses were sitting up and taking notice, and before we knew it, we had businesses who were desperate to jump on the deliveries wagon, because supermarkets were stowed out with home deliveries. They were putting their hands up and saying, "Can you help out?" I'd never seen a cargo bike before, and suddenly here was a solution. And so out of this crisis came an adaptation. And what these businesses found was that when these volunteers were arriving at their customers' doors with their groceries, sometimes quite heavy, the customers were delighted. They were like, "This is what we want. This is what we want to be supporting." And so they were phoning up and making orders and saying, "And can we get them delivered by cargo bike, not by van?" And that fits really neatly with this, the study by the British Chamber of Commerce revealed that 90% of businesses in the UK know that congestion is a problem in city centres. And yet there's 68% of us still take those everyday journeys under 5 kilometres. We still take those by using cars. And so if we can encourage people to use bikes or use their legs instead for, yes, deliveries within business, that's just one. But if we can get our staff to get to work and drop their kids off at school first, that's another. There's inter-site journeys that you can do within businesses. You can conduct walking meetings. You can even, well, let's say the elephant in the room here, you don't actually even have to get to work. If we're trying to reduce congestion, here we've just noticed that we don't actually need to be travelling as much as we do. We can afford to stay local. And in staying local, we revitalise our local high streets. So this whole thing has opened my eyes to how the health agenda and economy can absolutely 100% help each other.
I think there is so much tied up in that. I mean, quite frankly, we've got an hour this morning. We could probably fill an entire day's worth of seminar around all the different aspects of active travel and how it fits with what is a much wider agenda of sustainability in the cities that we have, and indeed in the wider communities. If I wanted to look specifically at Edinburgh, the Climate Commission for Edinburgh yesterday published its recommendations, and it very clearly puts localisation, that 20-minute neighbourhood, can you walk within 20 minutes to all the facilities that you need, at its heart, but it also puts zero carbon transport at its heart as well. And of course in Edinburgh, as one example, we have a 2030 net zero carbon sustainability goal, which is incredibly ambitious and which the council itself cannot deliver. It has to be a joint partnership working. And again, that there's a very strong role for business there, whether it's looking at how you get deliveries made, whether or not it's looking at how you get your customers to arrive at your point of delivery, all of those kinds of things. And cargo bikes and e-cargo bikes are quite possibly one of the biggest game changers for businesses, because despite everybody thinking, well, how much could you carry on a bike? Actually a surprising amount. It can be the equivalent of a small van. Sorry, Lee, do you want to come in?
200 pineapples last night, Leslie, to be exact. To give you an example, there was one bike with 200 pineapples from a supermarket to a food bank.
I think that's clearly going to have to be our measure of volume from now on. How many pineapples can you fit on a cargo bike? But it's a wonderful example where if you are sitting as an ordinary citizen, you'd never think to transport either that volume or that kind of good by cargo bike, and yet it can be done. And the impact that it could have on the logistics part of business is enormous. I know that when we were starting the tram extension project, which takes us from the city centre down into Newhaven, down Leith Walkinson, one of the first things I said to the tram team was that we had to look at some kind of provision for those businesses that are going to be impacted during construction. And the logical part there was to put in place a combination of cargo bike support, so businesses who could take advantage of it as and when they needed it, and a logistics hub, which was to allow delivery around the construction site and to help there. That's getting underway and seems to be working very well, and I think is a really useful exemplar of the benefits that can come to businesses of a variety of sizes in terms of delivery and their choices about how they go about making that last mile delivery. Right at the top of this meeting, there was a mention made of the city mobility plan that we have here in Edinburgh. It's a project which is going through, and as part of that, we're looking at all sorts of aspects of logistics. Can we, for example, help to reduce air pollution and congestion and all those other negative impacts around a lot of vehicle traffic in a small city centre? Can we help to alleviate all of that and bring better economic benefits by actually keeping our transport hubs on the edge of the city and bringing in goods and so on where possible, but bring them in by greener, cleaner, more sustainable, sometimes quieter vehicles. Some of that would be cargo bikes, some of that might be electric vehicles of some form. There's only often chat about bringing in stuff overnight on the tram into the city centre, quietly without the bells ringing, in order not to disturb the residential areas that we go through. So there's a lot of variety and creativity that can be brought into that. And I do wonder whether or not businesses are aware of some of those possibilities and whether or not they would be willing to adopt them in response to the period that we've had at the moment, and a sort of waking realization that we need to accelerate change as quickly as we possibly can if we're going to, I hate to use this term, but reap the benefits of this period, because clearly from a society's point of view there have been enormous downside. I'm talking here just about the economy, but there's also been a change in perspective. There's been a chance for people to take a step back, whether it's in their own individual lives, and get the benefit of getting out and walking and cycling more and so on, as a family, as an individual, for exercise, whatever they've been doing. But there's, I hope, also been a period of reflection with businesses about how they go forward and how they can make the most of it. And we know that, for example, delivery by e-cargo bike of those 200 pineapples or the 200 pounds of volume you might get is wildly more efficient, both and much more sustainable than, say, a small van dotting around doing a variety of deliveries. You can get through traffic faster by cargo bike. You can avoid contributing to the problem of congestion. You can avoid contributing to the problem of air pollution, and you can be much more efficient in your delivery of goods around the city. There are 1 or 2 companies already that are underway with this. As a small company based on Forest Road and down in Leith called Union of Genius, and they are suppliers of soup to various outlets, and they are out delivering every day by cargo bike and have been doing so for years, and they find it efficient and cost effective and very sustainable, non-polluting. So there are examples of that already in Edinburgh. I think we just need to widen that out a little. So clearly, we referred earlier on to some of the myths. Karen was talking about that earlier on when we were talking about the myths around active travel and the impact on shopping areas and so on. What do we think as panel members are some of the key barriers to the adoption of active travel as either a core part of individuals' lives, whether it's in the commute or whatever, and the adoption of active travel options for businesses in terms of their own logistics requirements? Lee, can I come to you first on this one?
Yeah, I'm just actually at the moment with a couple of interesting comments from Carrie and from Jerry, just saying that they absolutely don't doubt the benefits of active travel, but that it is this making the streets and facilities in the public realm safe, and I have to say, I was overjoyed to see the number of people out running and cycling and walking during lockdown, and the reasons for that were directly contributed by this the public realm being nicer place to move around in. People were out riding on the roads with their kids, and they were just saying it was incredible, and I thought it was also incredible. And there was a little bit in the back of my head that was thinking, but what is this going to remain? What's going to happen when people do start to drive again? And especially because everyone was so anxious about contracting this virus, people are going to leap into the cars, and then those that can afford a car are going to be impacting those that can't. It's not that child's in that child's choice to get around. They have to move around actively. And so there was a niggle of me. It felt like this twilight period where, oh, this is great, the infrastructure is ours, the city is ours, the people, it belongs to people and not vehicles, and that felt fantastic. And I think now, with the increase in traffic again, that has been lost, and we're in this little transition period where I know that Edinburgh is trying really hard to try some stuff. To put in some trials and to show people actually we can coexist. Traffic, car and van traffic can coexist with cyclists and walkers, but we're not there yet. And so we're in this switchover period that's going to require a bit of a leap of faith. And we don't have safe places. We have some incredible places in Edinburgh, and I love it. And if you're creative, you can link them all up, and you can get a great cycle or walking route out of most areas of Edinburgh. But we do need to take some leaps of faith, try some stuff, try some segregated cycling infrastructure, try to pedestrianise some streets, and just sit with it for a bit and not be sure what the outcome is going to be. But it's all temporary, and it can all be changed again. But there's real resistance to that. People don't like change. People are very anxious just now. And so we need to listen to that anxiety and move, but at the same time not lose our nerve. We've got an opportunity to try this stuff, and we need to help the people that are making those decisions to feel like they're making the right decisions. So I think we need to shout quite loudly about how much we all benefit, we all stand to gain. Jerry's points are around potholes as much as traffic. I hear you, Jerry. I ride every day, and I feel that, and it is an issue, and I'm again, I think if there was more space on the roads, then we'd be able to work around that while the council catches up and puts those things in place. But at the moment, we're being shoved about and pinioned anyway, aren't we? So the more space, widening those footways, segregating that cycling, the more chance we've got to make these improvements.
Yeah, if I can just pick up on that, because I think you're right to highlight some of the comments that Jerry had in there, and also the one from Carrie too. In terms of what we're trying to do at the moment to create that safer space, that ease around active travel, is that we've got a whole number of schemes that are currently out for feedback at the moment, that are looking at all of the town centres, the shopping areas, for want of a better phrase, places like Stockbridge and Gorgie Dalry and Bruntsfield and Morningside and so on. What we're doing there is looking very much at pavement widening. We're looking at segregated cycle lanes, and those will all be going in quite quickly. There'll also be arterial road segregated cycle lanes. We've already got a couple of examples of that in the lead up to the hospitals, the two key hospitals. We've already put in segregated lanes, which have gone down very well. There's going to be a big expansion of that in the coming weeks. I happen to know because I've got the spreadsheet of what we're doing on my own computer, and I can see the stuff that's coming down. So in fact, providing that infrastructure we're on the absolute cusp. And it's interesting because I talked earlier on about acceleration, and what this has done is allowed us to leapfrog very lengthy consultation statutory processes to allow us to get those measures in place, and then it will allow us to measure the impact and to understand how it's benefiting the city, or where it needs to be tweaked, I hasten to add. In terms of people coming in from outside of the city, which Carrie touched on in her comments, clearly it's an issue, because if you're accessing the job market, or indeed coming in for leisure into Edinburgh, and you're coming from quite a distance, and you've got a rural start to your journey, how do you finish that journey? Can we make it acceptable and attractive for you, either as somebody who's delivering, or somebody who's coming into work, or whatever reason, to stop at the edge of the city and pick up an alternative means of travel, either by walking if it's appropriate, or cycling, or hopping onto public transport? Can we do that more effectively than we do at the moment? And again, that's something that we're working on, trying to find ways of doing that. So there's a number of things packed into that. Now, in terms of potholes and safety on the road, because there are two elements of safety for cyclists on the road, and indeed for pedestrians as well, which is the road condition and the volume of traffic. And all the surveys that we do come forward put volume and speed of traffic as the two key issues. Potholes follow on closely behind that, and as a cyclist myself, I know the pain of trying to avoid them. In actual fact, our road conditions index, which is an independently assessed piece of work, actually shows that we're improving the condition in Edinburgh. I know it doesn't feel like it. There's an awful lot of talk around potholes, but in actual fact, we're moving quite quickly. We've changed our methods that's allowing us to cover bigger areas. We have, for example, in a very high-profile thing, we've just resurfaced part of the mound right in the very centre of Edinburgh, and that's part of the Spaces for People initiative. So you'll see some differences coming forward, and I hope that it will allow people to feel that they've got an improved environment as we go forward quite quickly in the next little while. And we're trying to make the best use that we can of our capital budgets to allow us to do major road resurfacing projects. Karen, we've got kind of slightly, we went into an Edinburgh-centric council speak there in that last answer that I was giving. But do you want to come back to this whole question about the kind of barriers that people might feel, particularly from a business point of view rather than the individual commuters?
Yeah, absolutely. No, because I think the commuter, the number one barrier, I think, from a commuter perspective has been well covered, which is around the infrastructure and the safety point. The next point I would make is probably connected, which is cost for people, but that's where businesses, I think, can actually come in by participating in some of the cycle to work schemes that can actually remove that barrier for employees. And And I think from probably the biggest barrier, you know, maybe from a business perspective, is it's that idea of change, isn't it? It's the uncomfortableness of, you know, things changing from what we know. And we've just, you know, we talked earlier about, you know, some of the myths that were busted and some of the actual studies that have been carried out around the globe. So I would, you know, my message to business would be to actually collaborate, you know, with your council, especially, you know, in Edinburgh, where actually you've got a real opportunity there, because it is one of the, you know, the most prominent councils, I think, in Scotland that's actually leading the way locally, you know, in this agenda. And actually they need business, you know, as much as you need them, because actually what you can do is, I think, remove some of the barriers around just even around that, you know, that idea of us not being comfortable with what change might bring. Actually get involved and actually help track, you know, your employees' travel patterns. Share that with the council, because the more information, you know, that they have, then it means that, and you know what Leslie was saying there, which is we're in this period just now where councils are able to trial, they're able to do things temporary. So I think, again, removing that barrier of, you know, feeling uncomfortable with change, that means it won't be permanent if it doesn't work. There will be some things that we do in the next few weeks and months, you know, that we realise actually that's just not workable, but we can learn from it and then we can put in something that's better. I think, you know, probably, sorry, not want to jump on maybe where you're going next, but I see a lot of opportunity right now as well, and we felt in Sustrans quite uncomfortable to even think about that way back in March, because actually we thought, well, this isn't the time to push, you know, the active travel agenda. But then what happened was, and I think Lee had said, other policy areas were looking and saying, actually, this is what we need in order to help emerge from lockdown. But actually, as we've come through the last few months, I think there's three things that have happened that are probably helping to really remove whatever barriers were out there. The first thing is that I think the leadership that already existed around this, and I mean political leadership, I think some of that has been amplified and accelerated, and it's been wonderful to see I think this kind of ripple effect that's now happened across Scotland, where other councils, where active travel just wasn't on their agenda, they maybe just don't have the capacity. They've got, or they're in a different area, they've got different challenges, but because of what's happened, they're actually turning now to some of the councils, you know, who are leading the way in this and thinking, like, oh, hold on, that seems like a good idea, that could work up here. And actually, we've started to see some councils starting to collaborate. So I think that political leadership is a real opportunity, and I think that has to continue. I think also, you know, sometimes a barrier can be, especially around that infrastructure point, is, you know, do we have the money to do this? And actually what we've seen is a real appetite from Scottish Government to support councils. So this fund started off that, you know, Sustrans is managing at £10 million, and then within a few weeks it basically trebled to 30 million, because we realised the scale and appetite that actually was starting to be unlocked out there. So there's a real opportunity, I think, there at the moment, because, you know, public finances, Leslie will know and say, is, you know, it's such a precious resource at the minute, and yet our governments locally and nationally are willing to commit funding to this at the minute because they know it's the right thing to do. And then the last thing, I think, which might have been it still is a barrier, but actually it's becoming less of a barrier, is that all of what I've just talked about has been in response to, I think, the biggest opportunity, which is the behaviour change that we're starting to see, and we have seen, and we saw it, you know, when we went into lockdown. And, you know, when you think back, when First Minister standing up there telling us that we were allowed out once a day, you know, for, was it 60 minutes of exercise, and it was absolutely mind-blowing when you did venture out, and suddenly you're like, where did all these people, you know, start coming, you know, from, you know, that are jogging, walking, families, you know, out, and people on bikes. And I think we're still seeing that, but I think one of the barriers is that it's really hard to predict what's going to happen, because you've basically got a situation where none of us have been in this before. We're talking about a new normal. It hasn't even stabilised into anything yet. you're seeing an increase in a lot of the positive behaviours, but we're also seeing an increase in a lot of the behaviours that we don't want to see again, which is, you know, people just jumping in their cars because they feel safer, you know, right, in terms of doing that. But I think, turning that back round, I do think that there definitely has been a behaviour change, so much so, actually, just to finish on this point, one of the biggest barriers right now for active travel is if you don't have a bike, it's impossible to get a bike. And, you know, it's like the positive has become the challenge. So it's a very, very strange, but I think a situation that Leslie, you'd said a moment ago, you know, that we have to seize the moment and take this in the direction that it needs to go in.
I'm going to have to wrap this up now and hand back to Jo to sort of finish off this session. But I think what I'd like to do, kind of in summary, really, is that for businesses who are out there of whatever size or purpose, there is a positive benefit around active travel that can be found, and there is enormous support politically now for this, and with that support comes understanding, flow of money, desire to work with in partnership and so on. And I know that that's certainly present within the Edinburgh City Council. We're looking at all sorts of aspects of economic recovery with active travel at its core. We're looking at a shop local campaign. We're looking at all sorts of other aspects. And so there is a genuine desire there, I think, not just in Edinburgh, but elsewhere in the country, to try to harness the benefits of active travel, embed them into our society, embed them into the way in which people do business and the way in which customers reach you, and the way in which your employees participate in their working life using active travel. We haven't even begun to touch on some aspects of changes to working patterns, working from home, some days, other days using active travel. The perception that a lot of people are going to be getting rid of second family cars, you know, what impact does that have on travel, etc., and congestion? There's a whole raft of issues that sit beneath this conversation, and it's something which I'm hoping that we will be able to continue at some juncture, maybe not in this setting, but as we go through the next few months, the changes that we embrace will define the success of our future. And I think we need to be very cognizant, every one of us, either in the audience or in the panel here, needs to be very cognizant of the positive benefits of active travel and how we can best work those into our working frameworks. And how best we can make them work for us as individuals and as businesses. So on that note, first of all, thank you very much both to Lee and to Karen. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I hope it's been helpful, but I'll pass back to Jo now for some of the questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leslie. As you said at the start, we could spend the whole day on this, I think, and still not touch the surface of a lot of the issues. Well, I guess then, just sort of for me to summarise, I mean, there was a lot to unpack in that conversation, and it was so interesting. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for your contributions, and also to our attendees for their contributions too. I mean, I think for me, you know, talking about the role in inclusive economic growth, and we're hearing a lot about that now, the inclusivity piece is more and more coming up the agenda. So I think there's a lot of positives there in this topic. I think, Lee, the information that you gave in terms of the TfL report, in terms of the boost for retail spending, you know, I think anything, or retail, we have a number of retail members and hospitality members, I think anything that would boost their revenue and their footfall at this point in time is absolutely to be welcomed. And the information that you sort of gave around the impact on productivity and the reduction of absence, all these things are great news for business and for the economy more generally. So you know, I think those are messages that we can keep pushing. Likewise, Leslie, the numbers that you gave for Manhattan in terms of 5 times more retail spend, I think, you know, the benefits around things like the reliability of time and the ability to control localisation and the importance of localisation to this as a topic, and partnership working, and I think that's a really, really important message, and that's something that we as a chamber can take on board and that we can help to facilitate. I think one of the things that's come out of this for me is this is a conversation that needs to keep going, and we as a Chamber of Commerce have a role to play in that, as do our members and as do all of our stakeholders. But that is something that we as a chamber are committed to doing, is to keeping this conversation going, and to being that conduit, providing as much information as we can and supporting this initiative as much as we can also. We talked about some of the barriers in terms of safety and cost, and it was really encouraging, Leslie, to hear what you were saying in terms of how the council is trying to address some of those issues and make it as safe and accessible and as easy as possible to move around the city. And that point of political leadership being amplified and accelerated, then we're definitely seeing that, certainly in our engagement with the council, and that communication piece. And again, I think that's something that we can do as a chamber, is to be that conduit of communication, so that we can do things like trial things. And I think that concept, is just one of, and I know we hate to use the term benefits coming out of this situation, but I think if there are positives to come out of it, that willingness to try things, I think is something that we would endorse and hope to see more of. So again, can I please thank our panelists, Karen, Lee, and especially Councillor McInnes for doing a wonderful job of chairing this morning, and for setting context. I know that you're exceptionally busy at the moment, so thank you so much for taking the time out, and thank you to all of our attendees as well for your contributions.